I talked about in the Davis Mills video that every year there's one or two quarterbacks that seem to really get a lot of momentum with draft media, draft Twitter, as you get into the last months and the last weeks in the draft cycle. Like, people start to watch them more closely, they start to evaluate them perhaps from a different lens, a different perspective, and they start to like more and more of what they see, or they talk themselves into liking more and more of what they see. And I talked about in the Davis Mills video that I thought he was being pumped up just a little bit too much. Doesn't mean I think he's a bum, but I thought that other people were hyping him up to be, frankly, a better prospect than he was. Now, with that said, there's a flip side of that. There is a quarterback that the more I watched him, actually, the more I liked him. Even though he has some flaws, some somewhat significant flaws that he's going to need to work on. Whereas I talked about with Davis Mills, some of the lack of athletic traits that I saw, that makes me concerned. When I talk about Kellen Mond, he has those athletic traits. And when I think about some of the things that he may need to work on, I could see him more likely to improve a little or more than a little in some of those areas, as opposed to, let's say, Davis Mills. Because I will tell you, the more I watched Kellen Mond, I started to like what I saw. Far from a perfect prospect by any stretch of the imagination, but a young man, a kid that was a multi-year starter and a pretty high-level starter in the SEC at Texas A&M. You could see the growth and progression in him throughout the last 3 years. The more I started to watch him, this is another name that people have been buzzing about more and more and seem to be warming up to. I'm kind of on board with the Kellen Mond bandwagon. I really, really am, because I saw more of those translatable athletic traits. And even some of the concerning areas, like no quarterback prospect is ever going to be perfect. No quarterback is ever going to be perfect and be able to do everything. There are trade-offs, pros and cons, like things you emphasize because of your strengths and things you try to minimize because it's their weakness, whereas opposing defenses try to maximize the weakness and force that quarterback, that system, that offense to the weakness. Here, at least I can say this kid has things that he could lean back to that could project pretty well. He's big enough. I mean, he's not huge, but big enough. He is in that Dak Prescott size mold, Jalen Hurts size mold, Patrick Mahomes size mold. They don't all have Deshaun Watson size mold. They don't all have to be 6'5", 230 pounds to last at quarterback in the NFL. And when you look at him, you're talking about a guy that was a high-level starter, I think, for 3 years in the SEC, took some physical abuse and pounding, sure, and was able to hold up to the rigors of it. To me, that's battle-tested. That's something that you feel like you can count on. So I like that and say, his size is plenty good enough for him. But he's got a strong arm. I don't think he has a Zach Wilson, Trey Lance laser beam, but he's got a bit of a howitzer. He can ramp up and he can really fire that ball in to tight windows in the short and intermediate areas. And I think you saw some of that arm strength be able to flash itself down the field. When I look at that, that's, to me, physical trait number one of something that, for his game, would absolutely translate to the NFL level. His mobility. This is another guy that fits kind of that modern mold of the dual threat quarterback that even when you're talking about early in his career, maybe he will have some adjustments to make as a passer and there could be some growing pains. And let me be clear, there absolutely would be with a Kellen Mond, so you have to draft him if you're a team. You have to understand you might need to be patient. I don't know if that patience automatically means he has to sit a year and learn and develop, but you have to be patient because there are going to be growing pains with him as a passer. There are going to be growing pains with him as he picks up the speed and the schemes of NFL defenses. But the arm strength plays. The mobility absolutely plays. He can be a game breaker as a runner. Some guys are mobile and have enough movement skills just to survive and extend a play a little bit. Some guys have another level where they can be a little bit of a weapon or a threat. And some guys can be a pretty big weapon or threat as a runner. And I think Kellen Mond certainly has shown that he can be a weapon or a threat as a runner. Not absolutely generational or super dynamic as a runner, but certainly enough where you would have to game plan for that. You would have to consider as a defense keeping in a spy or having to have your edge rushers not come in so aggressively and hold the edge because you're afraid that Kellen Mond is going to rip you apart with his feet. And I talk about he's a durable kid, seems to be a good leader, was well coached under Jimbo Fisher. Again, you saw that growth and development over the past 3 years. I saw what felt like a decent decision maker, didn't take a ton of unnecessary chances. At times, I would have liked to have seen him, hold just a little bit longer before he took off and ran. But in general, this was a guy that I did also see that had some natural instincts and feel for the pocket. This is a guy that can move around a little bit. There's a guy that could gently shift his protection as opposed to scrambling around all over the place, like let's say a Russell Wilson does. And I don't mean that as a knock on Russ, but everybody always blames the offensive line in front of him. Well, sometimes some of those sacks are exactly the fault of Russell Wilson because he breaks down the protection in front of him. He gets impatient and he starts dancing around. And you have to live with that because you're going to have some of those plays where he fucks up the protection in front of him and he's going to get sacked. But you're also going to have those plays where he breaks down the protection and he's able to make something spectacular happen. So it doesn't have to be like an ultimate big knock. It's just something sometimes you have to live with. And you might have to live with it occasionally with a Kellen Mond. When I look at his game, there are a couple of things that I feel like really need work above the rest. You saw at Texas A&M, it was a lot of one read and throw. And you could see some of his ability to scan the field and go through his progressions and be able to process relatively quickly. So when he did do that, he didn't just sit there and stick and stick and stick and stick on the primary target. Like, he could move around. That said, he didn't do that all the time. It certainly wasn't consistent. This is a guy that had a tendency, and certainly probably part of this game, it's a lot of the challenges we see with a lot of these college guys, is they have a tendency to lock onto the primary read because that's what the system tells them to do. That's what the offense is. And sometimes when you got nice skill players around you, you don't have to go through all of your progressions. Like, when I look at a guy like Kellen Mond, I saw some ability to diagnose and process what he sees and react to it relatively quickly. I would like to see him accelerate that process even more, speed it up a little bit more. But I've certainly seen enough flashes of potential to say to myself, he might struggle early in his career with some of those elements of the game, but as time goes along, he'll be able to grow into that and develop that a little bit more. I think mechanically, he's a guy that, I do like the way he holds the ball up here and kind of holds it up under his chin, gets it into a throwing position. There is a little bit of length to his throwing motion that I would like to see him be able to shorten up, especially since he already has natural arm strength. In some cases, less is more, and a little less effort on the backswing can generate a little bit more power because you're able to move more efficiently. It's not always just about the length of your windup and et cetera. I would like to see him work on his footwork, work on better utilizing his entire body in his throwing motion, especially stepping through throws, especially if the pocket and protection breaks down around him a little bit. It gets a little concerning. Sometimes he throws some of those off-platform throws, and that's where it starts to impact his accuracy. And I will say his accuracy is a concern for me in the sense of it seems like most throws, especially the ones over the middle or in short and intermediate areas, he tends to like to laser beam in there. And ain't nothing wrong with being able to throw that frickin' rocket launcher. Like, sometimes you just need to be able to do that. But sometimes that's not always required. Sometimes you want to be able to throw with touch and feel. You want to be able to better lead the receivers because sometimes when you're saying, okay, I'm going to launch that ball in there, what that can also be an indication of, you feel like you have to launch that ball in there because you're not diagnosing quite quick enough what you're seeing and being able to read and then react and respond to what you see. I would like to see him again. I think this is where a little bit of, some of the feel for the position, some of the instinctual things, some of the mental aspects continue to improve in Kellen Mond's game. I would anticipate him starting to understand that, I don't have to launch every ball in there. Sometimes it's okay to throw with some anticipation. It's okay to throw with a little bit of touch, because I think that's where his accuracy starts to get a little scatterball, because most everything seems to come out with just one velocity, and it will lead to throws being low and away or high and up, and those can be dangerous. And I would say, like, if I was looking at him, like, my biggest concerns for him come in the accuracy space is if he can work on, to me, quickening up that throwing motion a little bit, leveraging a little more of his full body as opposed to just being like this and a wow, and just leveraging his upper body. I think he would get more consistent in the way he utilizes his lower body in the throwing motion, improving his footwork, stepping through his throws. Like, somebody's going to potentially end up with a bit of a steal in this draft. Now, I've assigned a second-round grade to him. Some people are going to say he looks like a Dak Prescott clone. I think he's got a stronger arm than Dak, but I certainly think there are other similarities there. I see him in him a little bit. I also see some Jalen Hurts in him a little bit. And you're talking about Dak, became a borderline elite quarterback in the league. And he was drafted in the 4th round out of Mississippi State. He was a guy that I was wrong on going back then. Especially for me, how stupid of me. Like, smart-ass me is always one that says, oh, this guy made 3 babies in college. That's a fucking megastar because you don't have a choice. That child support ain't no bitch. It don't play. But then I said, oh, Dak got a DUI right before the draft. How dumb can you be? So I dropped him down my board a couple rounds, and I was stupid. So you got to learn from those mistakes, is my point. So I look at him. He reminds me, he has flashes of Dak Prescott. He has flashes of Jalen Hurts. Point of the moral of the story is, like, if I was choosing between him and a Davis Mills, like, I'm going with the physical tools. I'm going with the more battle-tested player against a higher level of competition. I'm going with Kellen Mond. So for me, he's kind of falling out as QB 5 or 6 in this draft. Like, when I think about it, if you said to me, you like him a little bit more than Justin Fields? Yes, I do. Kellen Mond is QB 5 for me in this draft. And the reason I say that over Justin Fields is it's those elements of the processing for Justin Fields that just really, really hold me back. Because when I see things that the first nightmare that flashes through my mind is this looks like Trubisky, that's a major panic. In 3 or 4 years, I might look back and say that was me and my own Bears experience bias clouding my better judgment for all the other wonderful physical gifts and tools that Justin Fields had. It could be. Again, you change and evolve over time, and you have to be comfortable with, your greatness when you get something right, but you also have to be comfortable with your mistakes and your failures when you get something wrong. But I look at Kellen Mond, and I think similar level of physical talents and potentially more upside in terms of being able to develop and mold him. So, if a team is looking for a guy and misses out on the first 4 to 5 big names because you would assume Justin Fields will go sometime in round 1, 2, like, Kellen Mond would be the guy that I'd be more eagerly pursuing as opposed to a Davis Mills.